I have a rather tricky shot here. It was taken at dawn and the sun wasn't quite up yet, and I really want to bring out all the detail in this wood. The background isn't so important, so I'd like to do separate corrections on the foreground, this fisherman wood cutout, and the background so it fades away a bit more. So we'll start by loading a selection that I've saved for you. Select, Load Selection, and there's a channel called Fisherman, and I'll click OK. Now rather than do image adjustments, which would be a permanent destructive change, I want to make sure that if there's any subtle color corrections I need to make, I can do that after the file is saved and closed. So in the Adjustments panel, I'm going to start with Levels. And with Levels, I can actually stretch the dialog to see more detail instead of just being restricted to one or two sizes. This is brand new to CS6. You have the ability to make these as wide as you'd like to see more detail. Now, I inadvertently clicked away, so no worries, I'm on the Move tool. It didn't harm the image at all. As soon as I did Image Adjustments Levels, you may notice that I have a white area just over the fisherman and black blocking the levels everywhere else. Here's what I mean by that. If I take the highlight, this is no data, just flatlining. If I take the highlight slider and slide it to where the data starts, all of my highlight detail gets brighter. It's a very common trick in photo correction, so this was unretouched at all. Now I could take the mid-tone to the left, but I'm starting to wash out detail. I want to keep some of that rich contrast. The shadows, the darkest parts of the image, are looking flat overall, and I'll zoom in with Control plus or Command plus, and to make the shadows richer, I'll just slide a bit to the right until I'm happy with the overall tone. There I'm getting some nice rich color. If I fit in window with Command 0, Control 0, I could see I've probably gone a bit too far. So I'll back it down, and I often like to check myself by clicking the eye icon to see before and after. Flat and dull, pretty boring. Just a little contrast boost using Levels. I'll also go to Vibrance. Vibrance is something grabbed directly from Photoshop Lightroom, an application used specifically for photography. I'll take Vibrance and slide it up a bit. Now you can see this is affecting the entire image. Really the way to tell is this plant, I believe it's a jade plant in the foreground. If I take Vibrance all the way to the left, it's close to desaturate. It strips most of the color. All the way to the right, it's going to boost or richen the color. But as I said, this guy's the subject. I don't want to affect everything else. So I will trash the Vibrance layer by dragging it down to the trash can. And before I do Vibrance, I'll again select Load Selection and choose the fisherman. When I click OK, now I can add Vibrance. Now I've got another mask indicating the white area applies whatever filter or adjustment I make only to that fisherman. So now I'll boost the Vibrance, making a much richer photograph, but not affecting the background at all. Finally, I may want to do a special effect, which is called ghosting the background. So I'll load the selection one more time, select Load Selection, choose the fisherman, and click OK. But this time, I'll select the inverse or the opposite. And I will make a new layer, new layer, and name it white. The way I fake a ghost or soften a background is by making white only in the areas I want to lighten. So I'll choose Edit Fill. I'll select white and click OK. And now I've cut this guy out completely, but he's not really gone. you could see a tiny checkerboard area where the white is being applied everywhere except over the fisherman. That area is clear or checkerboard, indicating transparency. I'll deselect, and now I can lighten the opacity of that layer so it's not so paramount and I'm calling attention to just the fisherman. The last thing I may want to do is create artificial depth of field by blurring the background, something that most high-end cameras do if you have a lens that takes advantage of that. And I often tend to play with the opacity until I'm completely happy with it. But I'll click on the background layer and choose Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, which will let me edit the blur later. I'll double-click on that layer and name it Fisherman, and press Return or Enter. And finally, I'll run a blur on just the background. So I'll choose Select Load Selection, and this time when I choose Fisherman, I can invert to grab the opposite of the fisherman, just the background. So I'll click OK. Now all of the background is selected. Filter, Blur, Gaussian blur. And I'll dial it up until the background seems not obvious at all, still there, but not pronounced. And when I click OK, now I've created my final image. A great way to see before and after is to go to History and stretch your History panel. And if you click on the very top thing in History, here's before, flat, dull, distracting background. If I click the last thing I did, Gaussian blur, here's after. Rich, vibrant, improved contrast, and a minimal background. Be very careful to make sure before you save and close that you click on the last step in History so you don't lose all your undos. But work through this technique on your own and learn how to make the subject of your photo pop out by using adjustments with layer masks and smart filters in order to blend away a distracting background.